But you also talk about the flattened curriculum, and that's what we're going to sort of turn to I think, with the next part of the presentation. So let's see how much of this, Adam, aligns with what you've seen on your travels. So, folks, showing my long service with NSCAD, but 20 years ago, I remember attending an NSCAD conference at the Tate Modern, where copies of a really important report, School Art, What's in It, were stacked on the welcome desk as we all filed in. And I think that Anne Ingle, who manned that desk with a military discipline, may have slipped out for a few moments, because in the short time she was gone, the pile of books flew from the desk as we scooped up what we thought was a quality freebie. No, it was not. It needed to be paid for, and John Steers had to make a very stern announcement to us all to please either return our booty or report to Anne with our credit cards. And yeah, an obedient queue formed at the desk. I've got my copy on my desk here, and I did pay for it. Good news, however, as we're virtual, there's no room for misunderstanding today, because the report that we're going to hear about is freely available to you all to download from the NSCAD website. So nobody's going to have to stay behind at the end. I am delighted to welcome the authors of School Art, Where Is It? It's a timely return to the questions that were raised in that 2004 report. And this morning we've got Dr. Will Grant, Dr. Carol Wild, and Dr. Jo Fursman to share with us some of the key findings. And then we're going to follow that up with perspectives from primary classroom, and then also implications for relevance and representation. And following that, we will, Andy will open up a panel discussion, and we'll be really delighted to take questions from all of you. So do get ready with those questions. The Q&A box will open when the panel discussion starts. So with that information to hand, I'm now going to hand over and invite the report authors to tell us what they found and what they saw. And I'm seeing screen shared, but actually we're seeing your very, very full calendar.
Yeah, I'm almost there.
It gives us an insight, doesn't it, into what everyone is doing today and in their lives, and what it means to be here today. Brilliant.
There we
right,
go.
We can see your slides. Over to you guys.
Over to you, Will.
Great. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Great to see so many of you here on a sunny Thursday morning. And thank you, Michelle, for inviting us just to talk briefly about this piece of work, which has been really exciting for us to put together. Thank you, Andy, as well, for your introduction, and Adam for that really enlightening kind of piece of information there from Ofsted, which I'm sure will have lots of interesting questions. We're here to talk about, as Michelle very ably introduced, a report that we've put together called School Art, Where Is It? I have a real copy here, actually, although it is available online. In this report, we asked 36 art teachers how their curriculum is structured, and they very kindly provided, in return, the particulars of a single project or module from Key Stage 3 or 4, its name, the materials used, artistic and cultural references employed, and the skills and thinking processes that were featured. And our intention was to replicate the work of two other researchers, Downing and Watson. I have their report here, as Michelle mentioned, which took place in 2004. So a very similar report, but 20 years earlier. And we thought it would be enlightening to look for the changes that have taken place in that 20-year period with regards the curriculum that is taught in secondary school art and design departments. And it felt faintly ridiculous to us that in our work, all of us being teacher educators, so working in ITE, that we were still directing students to a decades-old document for empirical data on contemporary practice. And as such, I guess we very much welcome the forthcoming Ofsted subject review as well that Adam's been introducing, especially given that the last one I'm aware of was Making a Mark, which was published 17 years ago. So, and if you're anything like me during Adam's presentation there, you were scribbling notes, and I was trying to scrutinize the images on his slides. So it'd be very interesting to see what the full report includes. The outcome of our work, we believe, is a current illustrative record of the work taking place in secondary school art classrooms, at least across London, the Midlands and the South West, where the three of us happen to be based. And so we're going to very briefly pull out just a handful of observations based on those thoughtful contributions of the teachers that we spoke to. And I'm going to just talk a little bit about the contents of the curriculum, the stuff that our participants reported as populating their classrooms. So on media and materials first, one theme that surfaced repeatedly across our conversations was that of agency, and indications that this has diminished over the last 20 years. It's interesting to hear Andy sort of talk a little bit about the importance of that. In 2004, Downing and Watson were able to claim that art teachers held, and this is a quote, very considerable control over what they include in their curriculum content. But for many 2024 respondents, our participants, albeit not all, there was often frustration that the ownership of lesson content was moving further from their personal interests and expertise. And among early career teachers especially, the curriculum was sometimes described as externally imposed. I was thinking about that as Andy spoke about Morgan's psychic prison, and actually the idea that maybe there's also now some structural kind of prison bars that restrict the capacity for teachers to engage with their own kind of priorities in the classroom. Cara, do you want to move to the next slide if you can, please? That dynamic, that one of a lack of agency, was also evident when we discussed artistic media used by pupils. So in 2004, a quarter of the projects that teachers described provided learners with free choice in the media they might apply. None of our 2024 interviewees mentioned such optionality. However, projects today were more typically multimodal, so they introduced learners to more than one art form. So if this finding was to be problematized, we might suggest that the issue is located not necessarily in a narrowing range of materials in art departments, but a narrowing learner agency. And we'd ask art teachers to consider, in the light of that, the extent to which our subject should seek to provide artistic choice. And if the materials a pupil can access as they undertake a project are restricted, whether you can justify why. The second thing that I'm going to speak about briefly is artistic and cultural references on the curriculum. So another theme we observed was a passionate intent across the profession to diversify the artistic and cultural references that populate materials employed in the classroom. We encountered some brilliant examples of very contemporary, very inclusive curricula, and there is an evident disciplinary enthusiasm to ensure art curricula better connects to the lived experience of contemporary learners, which is a priority considerably less prevalent in the 2004 report. This correction is in motion. So in 2004, just 11% of the artists cited by art teachers were female or non-binary, while in 2024, this was 37%. Now, while Downing and Watson didn't record the ethnicity of artists mentioned by teachers, they did note only one reference to an artist outside of the European and American pop art tradition, a Brazilian artist, Annabella Geiger, who is an artist of Polish descent herself. Suggests not a very diverse curriculum along those sorts of demographics. But in 2024, we did choose to record the ethnicity of artistic references in our report, and 18% could be described as minoritized ethnic. However, with an English population that identifies as 51% female and a 37% demographic of minoritized ethnic school-age pupils, suggests the curriculum still has some way to go before it can be described as truly representative. After holding our conversations, we felt that while art teachers clearly want to respond to the needs of pupils, that willingness does not guarantee them the means to do so. Indeed, while some strong work has taken place to provide more inclusive, culturally rich and representative artistic references, much of the content described by our participants remains similar to that of 2 decades before. So the question here, again, back to the profession, is if we are so passionate about diversifying the contents of our curriculum, what is it that's holding us back?
Great timing, Will. Brilliant.
Over to you, Carol.
Really good. Okay. So in 2004, when Downing and Watson asked teachers what the influencing factors were on their choice of curriculum content. They of course had nothing to compare their findings to, whereas in 2024 we were able to compare what we found to their findings. And like Downing and Watson, there were some surprises, particularly around what wasn't mentioned. You know, things that perhaps are so ubiquitous that teachers perhaps they've just kind of got blended into the background of their lives. So, for example, it was rare to hear anyone mention the national curriculum or examination specifications as guiding curricular approaches. In 2024, there was the additional surprise that hardly any of our participants mentioned sourcing content or ideas for their curriculum online, despite many teachers talking about using large image banks of resources, particularly at Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5. So it was rare for teachers to mention the NSEAD resources, the big landscape, but also other widely known art education sites that are online. And being able to make a comparison with 2004 and note the changes, it raises the additional question of why such changes have taken place and are still taking place. And Will has already noted the restrictive nature of the curriculum in some departments we spoke to, and the lack of choice given to not only students in terms of what materials, processes and resources that they were made available to them, but also teachers also. So the quote on this slide is indicative of several others that we could have shown you. So many years ago, when we had a lot more curriculum time and before we became an academy, you had a lot more freedom with what you were doing. So now the rules are that all classes have to be doing the same thing, whereas before you sort of go your own way. We used to do a whole project around the time of the Turner Prize, looking at different types of art, and what makes art basically was the project. What this suggests is that one reason, a strong reason for the lack of agency that teachers have in terms of planning their own curriculum content may be the introduction of multi-academy trusts over the last 20 years, and a centralised control of curriculum content in such groups. I mean, 2004 teachers also complained of kind of there being control, but likewise, in 2004, lack of resources was named as a limiting factor, but perhaps more so in 2024. So we've got the kind of the double whammy of multi-academy trusts, reduced curriculum budgets, reduced curriculum time, all kind of forcing a much narrow approach in terms of curriculum. The centralised budget restrictive environment of MATs appears to be responsible for a lack of agency given to particularly early career teachers, but also to do with an overemphasis on the formal elements as providing a kind of rather shaky foundation for learning in the subject. And in many of the schools where we spoke to teachers, the justification for this was a kind of a perceived need to undertake remedial work to fill gaps that they felt hadn't been covered in primary school. And then it's interesting to note Adam's caution about making that kind of assumption. A hugely disappointing change for me as a 3D specialist has been the reduction in the exposure of students to 3D materials and processes over the last 20 years. We haven't got time now to go into how we calculated that. Perhaps that might be something we can discuss in the questions, but yeah, kind of the 3D materials has really kind of fallen off the radar in many departments. So one of the questions that arises from all of that is, how can the collective potential of multi-academy trusts be employed to share good practice rather than poor practice, without disempowering individual teachers and art departments to respond creatively to their own context, experience and expertise? Will also mentioned our interviewees' overwhelming stated desire to make their curriculum more inclusive of difference. For the vast majority, the inclusion of difference, though, simply meant adding to the already large image banks that they made available to their students. So the second quote on this slide, we have parts of some lessons basically where we just flick through slides and they're all very different. And we have concerns about this leading to a superficial understanding of artists' work and a stylistic rather than a conceptual engagement with the content of the artworks that students engage with. And in our report, we ask whether there is more work that can be done in teacher education space to equip teachers with these skills from the outset. As Will said, we're all teacher educators. And one of our interviewees did mention their initial teacher education as a place where they really got us thinking about how to deliver a broader curriculum and how to decolonise. But I think our assumption is, as Will has already mentioned, is that one of the reasons for the image bank being where the diversification is happening is that the spaces for teachers to really seriously think about radically changing their approach to curriculum, whether that's in terms of decolonisation, for example, space literally in time, and they don't have the time to kind of go away and do the research to get that kind of subject knowledge, but also the space in the curriculum that is enforced externally just doesn't exist. So should ITE in England provide additional opportunity for student teachers to consider the content of the curriculum and practice the design and delivery of new curriculum content? Over to you, Jo. Oh, hang on, this is a second slide for me. There we go. Over to you, Jo.
Hi, thank you. Also thinking, yeah, it's really pertinent for me too, because I started my teacher training in 2004. So this is kind of the report that's following me through the decades. Yeah, I'm going to speak about the using contemporary art, design and craft practice in the secondary school art and design curriculum. And as Carol mentioned, a lot of the teachers that we interviewed didn't mention that they use the internet for searching artists or looking at artists, and maybe because this is such a common thing. Whereas in 2004, this was only a sort of a beginning kind of way of teachers and pupils being able to investigate artist practice. And I said, so aside from visiting galleries or employing artists in schools, pupils' exposure to artwork really, or how pupils investigate artists is through the digital image, and that can either be from a gallery or an artist's website, and sometimes more frequently, I know some pupils are looking at TikTok to look at artists, or Pinterest, and other sort of web-based search engines. So Downing and Watson in 2004 showed their interviewees a set of 8 artwork images and asked the interviews for their responses. In 2024, we asked our interviewees to do the same. 5 of the images we retained, so they were the same as the Downing and Watson images. But we also swapped in 3 images to diversify the selection and include female practicing artists. So our list of images wasn't designed to be provocative. Carol, do you want to flick to the next slide, which has got the images on it? Yeah, it wasn't designed to be provocative, as Downing and Watson stated in 2004, but it was instead we used it to develop a discussion around the diverse media that artist practitioners use and this kind of practical and conceptual complexity possible in artistic practice. So during our interviews, valuable commentary was gathered and expansive discussions about how artist practice became integrated into a project and scheme of work were recorded. So justifications for using artist practice, I'm going to move this so I'm not looking over my shoulder almost. So justifications for using artist practice for evidence of technical skills versus content in artist practice was also a mode of tension in our discussions. In 2004, Downing and Watson questioned to what extent do teachers' own understanding of practice, either traditional, modern, and contemporary, impact the priorities of their curriculum intentions? In 2024, in light of our interviews, we asked art teachers, how does the artist practice in your curriculum reflect the lived experience of pupils and help them to demonstrate different ways to reflect on life in the 21st century? And maybe something that Andy mentioned in his opening talk. Carol, can you switch to the previous slide? Yeah, thank you. So this perspective enables art teachers to select from the breadth of artistic practice and make connections between genres, techniques throughout time to help pupils understand how artists work and function in the art world. So the power of artistic practice to communicate links pertinently to our question to art teachers about the perception of their art and design curriculum, and on reflection, the importance of a curriculum to function effectively with liveliness. So we ask art teachers, how does your curriculum holistically allow pupils to know about artists and their practice? So one of the 7 outcomes of this question to our interviewees focused on pupil dialogic knowledge with social, cultural, and natural environments. So if there is an expectation for pupils to succeed in knowing about and selecting artists to explore in exam folders and also later in their career, does this lay down the possibilities for pupils studying art to thoughtfully and carefully shape their own cultural capital? So we ask then that when there is an opportunity to study an art curriculum where content has been designed to meet the lived experience of pupils and provide agency in art-making activities, what kinds of powerful effects can this have on pupils? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Joe. And I think I've got a kind of a final statement to conclude our piece. I don't know how we're doing for time, but I think it's just important probably for us to note that we wanted to undertake this research obviously against a backdrop of crises in teacher retention, school funding, and arts education more widely. And we were delighted actually to meet with so many creative classroom practitioners who remain absolutely passionate advocates for our subject. And I'm sure the 100 or so people in the room today absolutely meet that criteria. And really, we used our report to ask some quite critical questions, but only really as a means to try and support the development of the discipline. And as Downing and Watson put it in their 2004 report, very much the kind of guiding principle of our work wasn't to provide a kind of universalist or complete sense of what's going on, but simply to set out some of the questions that seem to be exercising teachers in the hope of stimulating further debate. And I'm sure that's what we will have very shortly.
Thank you so much, the 3 of you. That was beautifully choreographed and timed. I don't know quite how you managed to do that so smoothly, but you did. And those kind of questions that you've been posing throughout the presentation in the report and also in the fantastic blog pieces that you've been writing for NCAD are what are going to keep the conversation going for sure. I can tell you that this report has been my absolute go-to in discussions with the DFE since it was published. It really is the most live illustration that we have of what's happening in secondary schools, so incredibly useful, and there's a lot of interest in it. But it also helps policymakers to understand the context and to think about the importance of what's happening before secondary education. I was really struck by this, what you were saying there about the remedial approach to curriculum, and the idea that somehow every learner is essentially in a state of deficit when they transition at transition points. And that's something that just follows right the way through to higher education as well. So yeah, vital that we understand where pupils have been, as well as where we think they are and where they're going. So